Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kayan Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
If it makes you happier and more engaged to work for a company, you're going to be more productive. So giving the same wage, you're actually creating more output per wage, or you're less likely to leave. So turnover is going to go down, and that will actually lower the cost per unit as well. Or you're going to be more innovative. We kind of know that, in order to create innovation, people have to be really engaged and motivated, and you have to give them some leeway. That makes them happier to work there, but also more innovative, which then will either create, ideas how to be more efficient or ideas how to make the customer happier. And so it could lead to not only the cost per unit going down, but maybe even the willingness to pay.
Great.
On the other side go up.
That was Stephan Meier, chair of the management division, and the James P. Gorman Professor of Business Strategy at Columbia Business School, whose work lies at the intersection of behavioral economics, business strategy, and the future of work. Customer-centricity has long been at the forefront of conversations that involve optimizing profit, with the idea that happy customers lead to increased revenues. But a new theory is quickly gaining traction, that employee-centricity is just as important. As you heard in the highlight clip, Stephan is a big advocate for the idea that happy employees not only boost company morale, but have a clear, direct correlation on the bottom line. In his forthcoming book, The Employee Advantage: How Putting Workers First Helps Business Thrive, he collects fascinating case studies and insights from his research to showcase how businesses that invest in employee experience often outperform others. In this conversation, we discuss how you can adapt customer centricity frameworks and tools to improve your employee experience, the 4 key motivators in the workplace beyond compensation that have an enormous impact on performance, how technology can both help and hinder the workplace, and how you can use it to optimize the employee experience. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephan Meier. All right. Well, Stephan, thank you so much for being here. I loved your book, and I'm excited to dig into it a little bit, at least with you.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to open up with the same 2 questions I ask all of our guests. The first is just for us to get to know you a little bit personally, may have nothing to do at all with your work. If you could complete this sentence for me: if you really know me, you know that.
I'm really excited about making Lego stop motion movies.
Really? When did that start?
So it started about when I was actually writing the book in the first fall, and I was juggling between writing the book, teaching. I'm the chair of the management division here, so dealing with the administrative stuff. And I was really, really stressed out. So I kind of needed something to ground me. And I stumbled across this book in a airport bookstore, like how to make Lego stop motion movies. And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, that would definitely ground me. And I have a lot of Legos from my son. He's now 14, he's not that much into Legos anymore, but I still have all of those. So I thought, why don't I make Lego stop motion movies about the book? So I'm making Lego stop motion movies related to work, the workplace, and the future of work. So they're all related to ideas, chapters in the book, and I have many of them. And now I decided, why don't I release one after the other with my newsletter, or then I now started to do endorsements. Chewbacca is endorsing my book, and the Queen, and the Genie in a Bottle. So all those characters I had from my son. There's a Ninjago, and all those characters that I have from my son, I make now into Lego stop motion movie. And it's a very meditative approach, but also it reminds me a little, work has to be fun. And that's kind of where the fun comes in. I don't take those seriously. I mean, they're just meant basically for my enjoyment, but if somebody enjoys them, even better. And it keeps me really sane from like doing all those other work, which is more brain heavy. And now, moving Lego figures one frame after another is definitely very meditative.
Yes. Amazing. I love it. Yeah, there's so much we could draw on about creating space in a workplace for creativity, for, getting rid of that really efficient Six Sigma kind of mentality, the default mode of your brain. And, so we'll dig, I'm sure, into that next. So you're the chair of the management department at Columbia Business School, one of my alma maters. You teach strategy. You've taught strategy for a long time. So what's your definition of strategy?
So, my definition is like strategy is really a formulation and the plan and process that really involves making choices and thinking really carefully about trade-offs in order to add value in an industry. And by doing so, you can create a sustainable competitive advantage.
So there are lots of levers that you can use to create sustainable competitive advantage. And what I love about your work, if I'm going to oversimplify it, we've had Felix Oberholzer-Guy here. He's a good friend of yours, a good friend of ours, and he laid out his value stick. But as I understand, like you, with this next book, are focusing not on the top of the value stick, but the bottom of the value stick, or more so on the value. Can you just talk to us about what is the thesis of the book and why did you decide to take on the writing of the book?
Thank you. Yeah, it is very much related to this idea about creating value in an industry and related in some sort to like what Felix talks about with value-based strategy. And just to remind everybody, their value stick is kind of, you can create value on the top end of the value. So there's customers, clients. And in order to do that, you need to improve the customer experience or the willingness to pay. And if you're then different on increasing the willingness to pay, you're actually able to increase the price and or the margins as a result. If you're not different on the willingness to pay, price competition will lead to price drops down to cost. Now, there is a flip side, on the other side of the value of those value sticks is the supplier, and labor and employees being one of the most important suppliers. And the same logic, I argue, applies there as well. In order to create and then capture value, you have to lower the willingness to supply or make the employee experience better in order to actually lower the cost per unit, not increase it. And I think that's kind of the idea, the core idea. Employees are kind of like the new customers. And if we then apply everything, all the tools that we think about employee centricity, they also apply to, if we think everything about customer centricity, they also apply to thinking about employee centricity. So for example, nobody would say that customer centricity is lowering the price. Although, obviously, if you ask customers, price is an important attribute in most of the decision. But a lot about customer centricity is increasing the willingness to pay, making the experience better in order to actually increase the price as a result.
Clarification question here. I think some people will listen to what you said, and if willingness to sell is willingness to sell my labor for this company, and creating value is lowering the willingness to sell, so I'm willing to work for less and less and less, are you talking about paying employees less, trying to minimize what you pay them?
I mean, I don't think it's like paying them less overall, but like you pay them effectively less per unit. If it makes you happier and more engaged to work for a company, you're going to be more productive. So giving the same wage, you're actually creating more output per wage, or you're less likely to leave. So turnover is going to go down, and that will actually lower the cost per unit as well. Or you're going to be more innovative. We kind of know that, like, in order to create innovation, people have to be really engaged and motivated, and you have to give them some leeway. That makes them happier to work there, but also more innovative, which then will either create, ideas how to be more efficient, and or ideas how to make the customer happier. And so it could lead to not only the cost per unit going down, but maybe even the willingness to pay.
Great.
On the other side go up.
Great. And I love that you kind of dig into, if we take the lens that we have spent decades working on optimizing the value to customer, and we now turn around and apply that to employees, there are probably a lot of things that we do differently in the way that we engage them and segment and things like that. But before we get there, I'd love to hear your argument. Why are employees the new customer? I believe it. I've said it. I haven't proven it. You've been able to actually support it. But what do you say to someone that says, the pendulum is just going to swing back and forth? Right now, we're in a tight labor environment, so we got to really treat employees well. But, supply and demand will shift again, and then we don't have to treat them as well again.
Yeah. Good question. And I heard this all. It's like, in the business cycle, sometimes the employees got a little bit of the upper hand, but in the end, we're going to go down to squeeze them, and they're happy that they have a job. Now, if that's were the case, my book would be not that interesting. But I actually do believe that there are factors that led to customer centricity that are hitting kind of the labor market and will shift the power somehow to the employees. Let's go back to customer for a second. Like before there was customer centricity, it was product centricity. We designed like a gadget because the engineering department could, with all the bells and whistles, and then we took like marketing efforts to push it onto the customer and say like, you really need that feature that you've never thought about, but like you really need this. And then we shifted to, thinking about customer more, and the experience of the customer became more important. And I think we did that for four factors that led to that. One is, competition increased and innovation efforts became much more important. People had more choices, and now suddenly that's when then agility and constant innovation, you have to come up with interesting insight that customer actually wants. And number one, so innovation or competition increased. The second is transparency increased about the experience. Think TripAdvisor for hotels. Before you couldn't really know, and now you have TripAdvisor, you have product reviews, and you have all that information that really go into what the customer really cares about. And there is a lot of evidence that, TripAdvisor like gets rid of tourist traps. So there's one of my colleagues who has an article on my tourist traps in Rome are disappearing when TripAdvisor enters the market. So that's number two, kind of transparency about the experience. Third is there is a lot of data about customer. There is back in the days when I didn't know anything about you as a customer, there was no reason or no tools how I could actually tailor it to your very needs. Now Amazon and Netflix and whatever know so much about it that they can tailor exactly what I want and what I need. And there is obviously cautionary tales about how to do that right, but there is definitely more data. And maybe as a result, so that's number three, there is more data. And number four is their preferences changed. People got, actually wanted the experience more. The experience becomes more important. And probably as a result of the first three, customers got pickier. I always tell that story. When I grew up, I fought with my sister mainly about watching TV or what to watch on that one TV we had and that TV schedule. Now, we're now a family of 5 where like everybody watches whenever they want, at whatever time. There is no conflict with it, but everybody is like, it's personalized experience that kids have. And, my kids, I think they think like 2-day delivery is part of how the world works. They don't know that it's different. So somehow preferences change, that we want brands with purpose and personalization. I think all those first 4 trends hit the labor market as well. There is one, the agility, obviously the people do that. So we actually need to make sure that the people, the employees, deliver on constantly creating new ideas. There's also more competition. It's easier to switch.
Yeah, I love the line. One of the lines in your book is it's the employees that are going to come up with the innovations, that are going to come up with the ideas. And as companies need to compete more in innovation, the ideas are going to come from employees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is number one. Second, there is more transparency on the employee experience. I mean, the equivalent to TripAdvisor is Glassdoor.com, but like if you have a scandal, it goes viral. And as Bezos said about the customer, if you screw up offline, he or she tells 6 people. If you screw up online, he or she tells 6,000. I mean, I think that's true about the employee experience as well. There is much more data that we have about employees as well. So I do think this one size fit all is going to be over. And those who can actually figure out how to tailorize it, and maybe we talk about that later, how to actually think about the employee experience and tailor it to individual needs. And then as a result, the fourth, preferences are changing. People want to work for companies that have purpose, that give them some needs that they have. And I talk in the book about like what those needs are. And I think the days are over where we just force them to do their work. Does it go up and down in the business cycle? Absolutely. I think the trend is going to be that employees are going to be more important and going to make a difference if you want to create a competitive advantage.
Yeah. So there's some fluctuation with the market, but these are 4 long-term trends that are going to move maybe the pendulum's moving, but the pinnacle of the pendulum is also moving towards employees. That makes a lot of sense. I've got 15 questions, but they kind of all cluster around. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, all right, customer lifetime value has changed how people relate to customers. Should there be employee lifetime value? We had David Ulrich on this podcast, and he talked about, we segment and personalize products for customers, but we just sell a generic product, commoditized product that we call employment, right? We had John Windsor on the call, who's this kind of open talent person, and he talks about jobs can get fragmented into tasks and they can be configured in new ways. How do you see it evolving if a company's job becomes the product and their customer becomes the employee? Mm-hmm. How does work change?
Yeah, I think it changes in all of those aspects that you alluded to and even more. And I do think like if we think about customers and what do we do with customers, it's a good tool to think about what happens with the employee. So let's say if you would ask a marketing executive, is it a good idea to ask your customer once a year how they're doing? They would laugh their butts off. They was like, of course not. We need like constant inputs and feedback. Now, that's kind of what we do with our employees. We ask them once a year. Nobody cares about it. Now, both know, so the employees are not very engaged in those surveys. So we need to figure out kind of how to get input from the employees. The other is like the customization that you talked about, segmentation. We're doing a terrible, terrible job, if at all, in segmenting our employees. We sometimes do it like old school that like probably customers did like 20, 30 years ago. Old, young, rich, poor. I mean, that's what like banks would do 30 years
college
ago.
Degree, not college degree.
Yes.
Right.
And I think we have to move away from thinking about that and starting to segment more on behavior and attitudes, and so on and so forth. Now, does that mean we have to change? Absolutely. We need different types of data. We actually need to figure out, what do customer want? What do employees want? How do they tick? And then segment accordingly. In terms of like lifetime value of employees, I think that's a very, very important idea. I have a chapter in my book where it's titled like, is the employee always right? And the employee, the customer is not always right. So if we think about customer-centricity, it's not always right. And if anything, the right customers might be always right. So we have to figure out like what are the right customers, segment, and then tailor maybe to those very high value customers. I think we have to do that the same with the employees, figure out like, who do we want? Who do we don't want? How to actually then create an environment where we tailor it to those different employees. But choice then, it's important to have choice. Like for customers, if you segment, you can't tailor to every single segment. You have to kind of decide, I want to cater to that particular segment and that particular type of customer. And I think we have to do the same with employees.
A lot of companies will say that they do this well. aren't companies doing this well? And are there examples of companies that we think are doing it well but aren't, or example of companies who are doing this well?
Yeah, what is absolutely right. I've never heard any executive, the ones I read about or the ones I teach in our executive programs, that wouldn't say, employees are our most important asset. Now, there are a couple of evidence that that's probably not true. So one is what I collected. I actually looked at whether of two stakeholders, customers and employees, how much do executives care and talk about customers and or employees, and the difference couldn't be starker. Yeah, on average, they talk about 10 times more about their customers. It's actually increasing over time than employees. And when you then do text analysis, how do executives talk about customers? Customers are like growth, opportunities, and employees are like risk, costs, very negative terms. So that's one evidence. I actually got a little obsessed. I then looked at, strategy textbooks. How often do we talk about customers or employees? And it's about the same ratio. It's stark. You can go back to Porter, who has the 5 forces have buyers and suppliers. He talks much, much more about buyers than suppliers. But then what you can do also, when you look at the engagement levels that like Gallup, for example, collects for like decades, the engagement levels are terrible. About in the US, I think about 65% of workers are disengaged at work. I think worldwide it's even higher, like 80%. So I don't think executives actually care about employees as much or put enough effort behind it. And if they do, they're doing a terrible job in actually being effective.
Yeah, tell me more about that, because what I got from reading your book is when we do put employees high as a priority, we seem to say, well, their value is compensation, and you take a much more kind of human-centered kind of the view of a behavioral economist. Tell us, what do people get wrong when, with the current approach or the common current approach?
Yeah. Thank you. If it were all money, then obviously the logic that I just said about like how to create value would be not so. Then it would be a zero-sum game. Like I give you more money, comes out of my bottom line. It would be a little bit equivalent to like lowering the price to customers. But again, for customers, we're thinking about the experience very differently. What do they need and what do they want? So a big part of my book is about, how to actually humanize work by taking into account what motivates people beyond money. I write about money. There is on the lower end of the income distribution, money is undoubtedly very, very important. If you go to work and you're always worried how to make ends meet, that like hits productivity pretty badly. You can't just focus. But at one point, money just doesn't do that much more for motivation. And now we need to understand, what actually motivates people. So that's where my behavioral economics background on the research really kicks in to think about what are the motivators. And I narrowed it down to like 4 motivators that are important. Number 1 is purpose, or I call this shoot for the moon. And the idea is, people want to work for an organization that has a higher purpose. Very few wake up in the morning and say like, let's help my firm to increase the return on invested capital by like X%. That's not what motivates people. And I tell the story Shoot for the Moon about like, what NASA did under Kennedy to have like put the man on the moon and what implication that has, and to create it, because it's hard. Every firm has a purpose statement, but most of it are bad or not motivating. So I talk a little bit about what helps creating the right purpose. Number 2 is autonomy as a motivator, or I call it a matter of trust, because the flip side of autonomy is trust, where it's very, very motivating to be feeling empowered. But it's very hard for leaders to do that because now they have to give up, some control. They have to trust. And I think not just giving up control, but being involved even more, because I think one of the problems with autonomy or giving up control is often that they then completely disengage, which is a disaster as well. So they have to be kind of engaged coaches. Number 3 is competence. I call this just right tasks, which is I illustrated with a story about my son who I struggled with reading. I mean, he had to read 30 minutes a day at school, and we fought so hard. And, probably every parent can relate to that. I was telling him, look, if you just read 30 minutes when you come home from school, you can do whatever you want. That's all I ask you. Anyway, but one day he would pull me into a library, bookstore. It said I want to buy a box of books. And I was like, whoa, Christmas came early. So what happened? And he actually wanted to use his birthday money. So what happened is he actually found a book series that was just right for his level. That was not like a baby book, as he would say, if it's too easy. And what was not like Harry Potter. When you were 6, you wanted to read Harry Potter, which was too hard. And it's a very universal trait that people want to be optimally utilized in skill. Now, he obviously read this, it was called the Weird School series. After a while, that book series became a baby book. So he needed to move on. Now, employees feel the same. Most people actually leave their jobs because they're bored. They don't develop, they don't learn anything, they're done. And then they switch jobs. Now, we have to figure out kind of how to create just right tasks for everybody involved and constantly update, which is hard. And we can talk a little bit more about that because I think technology actually could help in dealing with that. It's a kind of a personalization that obviously consumer companies figured out. I know exactly where you are in what do you like in Netflix watching. And if you move on to another genre, Netflix will learn and will show you a new one. And I think the same can be done in the workplace. So that's number 3. And number 4 is what I call, or was called relatedness, or working together works, kind of creating the right corporate culture, so to speak, environment where working together really works. And so those are kind of the 4 motivators. And then I talk a lot about how to use those in order to humanize work and how also technology can help, but also can be very, very detrimental to some of those motivators if used inappropriately.
Love it. I have many more questions, and we are reaching the top of our time with you. What I think would be really helpful is to know what are examples of companies that we can look to for inspiration. I think that and this is just me making it up, but I think that you would agree, the reason that we went from product centricity and became so customer centric is because there were companies like Amazon who really did well by being, driving to be Earth's most customer centric company. So who is that next company that we can look to for inspiration that will inspire people who are motivated by profit to say, wait a second, it is now employee centricity?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much, Tyne. I mean, there are a number of them, and I discussed some. So let me give you 3 snapshots, short examples, and then you can dive deeper in the book. So one is Costco in the US. So it's really much more employee-centric than some of their competitors, in particular Walmart and Sam's Club. Now they do, also pay higher wages and have health insurance, but an important part of what they're doing is giving clear career path to people who come in. So it's you start at Costco and you kind of know what are the steps to actually making a career in progress and working on those just right skills. And as a result, they're not only, about 90% are internally promoted, but they're super successful. They making, people are very happy there. That creates a lot of loyalty on the customer side. People are willing to buy the subscription, are willing to pay for the Kirkland private brand that has higher margin and so forth. So that's an interesting example. And one is not a tech firm who has gazillions of dollars. to spend, like a low margin business in general. Another one is DHL Express, so the German delivery company with the yellow vests, and they were voted for many, in like 2 or 3 years in a row as the best employer in the world of all the companies. And they do a lot of things that are employee-centric, and a lot has to do with like just respect, empowering, getting feedback from even people who deliver, giving them clear career and training opportunities, and so many activities that kind of led to them being an employer that is like really valued. And the last example that I find really exciting is like Buurtzorg. That's a Dutch home healthcare organization who does, as a result, kind of to a fraction of the cost, and has much higher success and satisfaction rates than any of their competitors. And seen as kind of a revolutionary organization, and they do everything with autonomy. So they have teams of 12 nurses and give them complete autonomy on what they're doing, including hiring and what they're going to do. Now, what I find really interesting about this company is not just the autonomy, but in order to make that work, you need to give a lot of feedback. You need to act. It doesn't work by just giving, look, here's your task, go run for it. Because then often, stuff sometimes goes wrong and you have to intervene and whatever. What they do, their IT system is very, very elaborate, where they share all the information about all those different teams with all the teams, not in order to control, but in order to provide them with the right information to them self-correct, figuring out what is best practice. And they talk themselves about, like, on the top level, the headquarters kind of coaches. They help them if something goes wrong, but they're really more there to support in order to kind of micromanage. So those are 3 of the many I talk about, and some, tap into one or the other of the motivators a little more than the others, and all of them are successful in a result, because this is not altruism. So the book is really about, like, how can we actually put, as the subtitle says, putting workers first in order to make business thrive, in order to create more profitability and create sustained competitive advantage.
Love it. So the book is The Employee Advantage: How Putting Workers First Helps Business Thrive. I love that you not only speak to our hearts, but speak to our logic. And that, I think, is what we need in order to create this shift. How, in addition to buying the book, which we encourage everyone to do, how else can people connect with you and learn from you? Are you teaching any exec ed classes? Is there any other materials or ways to be connected with you?
Yeah, thank you, Kaya. I mean, once look at the book and write me comments about that once you read it. There is a lot of material on my webpage as well, stephanmeier.com, including a link to the Lego movies. And I also teach a bunch of executive education classes. So I actually have a 3-day online version on the future of work that I teach with Jeff Schwartz, who is a former partner at Deloitte and the lead of the future of work practice. I have a bunch of other exec ed programs here at Columbia Business School, and I also do public speaking, one-on-one.
Great
Consultations.
Well, we will encourage people to buy the book, to learn from you, to bring you in, because every worker out there, we need this. And thank you for doing that work and for really presenting it in such a readable, logical, and convincing way. Thank you.